Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I hope your day is going well. Today I'm going to be reviewing what I read for the month of March. March came and flew, and it's actually already the middle of April and I'm barely getting to this. So I read about 5 or 6 books, and there were a couple of hit and misses. I picked books that were based on the fact that it's National Women's Month in the United States. So the first book I read was Wolf Doctors by Sara Woods. And just so you know, if you're looking for this book, you might have to find the book under the author's former name. The author is transgender, but when I was trying to locate this poetry collection, I was having a little bit of a difficult time. So you might have to go by their dead name, unfortunately, in order to find the collection. I wasn't a big fan of this book. Maybe at a later time I'll enjoy it more. It's more of a whimsical read, so if you like whimsy, you'll enjoy this. Actually, if you like fairy tales, you will also enjoy this. If you like the Brothers Grimm, you will like this, but I just didn't happen to like it. It's a little too whimsical for me. And there's a technique that's used in poetry, and I don't know the correct term, but it's where repetition takes place with a word, a phrase, a line. The author uses this technique, but I didn't think it was really effective. Typically, if you see that there's repetition, it's meant to create emphasis or drive a point home. But when this technique was used in several poems, I just didn't feel like it was creating an impact to tell the story that the author was trying to tell. I think there is one poetry collection in here, one poem that I really liked. I think it was City Girl, and I felt like it was the author having a conversation about being transgender. I think it's page 35, and I really like the conversation that they're having in there. I really felt like there's a lot of meaning behind that poem, but other than that, I wasn't a fan of the rest of it. So the second book I read was I Hold a Wolf by the Ears by Lauren Vandenberg. She also wrote The Third Hotel, but I'm not familiar with it. This is a short story collection. I enjoyed every single short story. I felt like every single short story went together really well. It is covering misogyny, consent. It's talking about economic difficulties in America. All the characters are, all the protagonists, I guess you could say, are female. And it also takes place in Mexico City, among other places. There's one of the stories that I thought was incredibly effective. All right, so there's a short story in here that's called Lizards. And the conversation in the story is really about consent. The main characters, it kind of revolves around a husband and wife. And in this story, the husband has a conversation with the neighbor about it's not even like, it's not written overtly, but the conversation is like, the overall story is about consent. But then the neighbor goes on to say something to the effect of, on page 62, "Call me twisted," his neighbor whispered, "but it makes me feel like a ghost, like I'm walking through walls while everyone else is still using doors." And when you read it in the context of the story, it's just so creepy, because what he's really talking about is accessing his wife's body without needing her consent. And it's very creepy, but very effective. and I think he's painting what he enjoys doing, knowing what the boundaries are and doing what he wants anyways, in contrast to the husband, who I think is clearly also in violation of protecting his wife's boundaries and consent, but like in a different way. It's really interesting. So I highly suggest you pick this up. It's really, really good. Let me look. The next collection I read is a short story, no, not short story, essays, nonfiction by Roxane Gay, and it's called Bad Feminist. I absolutely love this. What can I say? She talks about feminism in a way that's always in reference to pop culture, such as musical lyrics. She also talks about how rape, assault are talked about in pop culture, but also in the news, whether it's the written word of like an article or a news outlet, how it's handled in storylines. She's just doesn't write her opinion about how she thinks feminism should be, but more like how it's actually applied or not applied in real life situations, while also putting herself into the narrative and talking about maybe there are some things that she still needs to work on. And I found that really interesting. As well, she talks about stereotypes and racism. So this is a really good read. I think you'll really enjoy it, because although she's talking about all these really heavy topics, she very much includes her own sense of humor. For instance, on page 108, she writes, I'm not sure how we can get better at having these conversations, but I do know we need to overcome our deeply entrenched positions and resistance to nuance. We have to be more interested in making things better than just being right or interesting or funny. So I just really enjoyed the nuanced conversations that she's willing to have on these topics. The next book that I read is Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall. She's a writer and activist and cultural critic. This is also tackling the same subjects as Roxane Gay's book is, but instead of it being humorous or focused on pop culture, the author is more interested in having conversation about what it means to be a feminist, to really examine and critique it. For instance, I think she wants to focus if someone identifies as a feminist, especially if they're a white person that identifies as a feminist, what does that mean? What are they trying to accomplish? Because in her opinion, feminism is about creating equality. And if that is to be so, is a person trying to truly create equality for everyone? Or are they more interested in pushing forward their own privilege, expanding on their privilege? And she also talks about the systems that are in place that create inequalities and how those need to be bettered. And if a person thinks that they're a feminist, then they need to try to help improve better, or just, help take down systems that are really not about equality. I really enjoyed this. I felt like there's a lot of different authors that I've read that talk about the subject of poverty, whether it's in nonfiction or fiction. And I felt like her writing kind of like encompassed all these other writers' thoughts into one book. They're her own original thoughts, but I just felt like she was tackling a lot of different subjects but she tackled them well and clear, and they don't fall under the pressure. Like the story is told clearly, and at no point does it feel convoluted. Like everything makes sense the way she put it together, and I really enjoyed it. So this is another one that's worth picking up. The other book that I read, which I wasn't supposed to read this year, it's Chola Salvation by Estella Gonzalez. I absolutely love this short story collection. I wasn't going to pick it up, but there's a book club that I just follow them on Instagram, and they're called rezgirlsbookclub. So they do focus on reading books by with a narrative of being Indigenous peoples, and they happened to pick up this one, I think for the month of March. And I was just interested in it because it's about all the characters grew up in East LA, and I have family that grew up there, and so it just piqued my interest. And so they have the characters living in East LA or going off to Mexico as their parents, or I feel like it's first generation that they're tackling, but it's like their parents are from Mexico or they go back to Mexico. And it's talking about around the 1980s. They're all, again, short stories. There's a lot of humor. It tackles heavy subjects such as rape and cultural pressures, religious pressures on what's expected of a female. For instance, there's this part of the book where this young girl, I want to say she's 14, I could be wrong. Well, yeah, hello. Yeah, she's going to turn 15 because quinceañera. So she's supposed to get ready for a quinceañera, but she really doesn't want to participate in that. She really doesn't agree with what's expected of her or what that symbolizes. And so the author writes really beautifully about the character cutting up her dress for the event. And she writes, "When I see all these little pieces of white on the floor, I freak out. They just sit there all shiny and white, staring up at me. I feel like I killed something." And so I feel like that's this young character, not just cutting up a dress, but really killing that part of her that everyone expects her to be, and kind of reclaiming her own womanhood and what she wants to be. So it was a joy. I really love this collection. And the very last book I read was The Rebel Nun by Marj. I think I'm saying her name wrong, sorry. I'm still in the middle of finishing it. I'm like towards the end. I wasn't a really big fan of this book. It's historical fiction. I really thought I was gonna love it. It's based on what happened in real life, which is, should I read this to you? I'll read it to you. The Rebel Nun is based on a true story of Clotilde, the daughter of a 6th century king and his concubine, who leads a rebellion of nuns against the rising misogyny and patriarchy of the medieval church. So although the story in the sleeve sounds riveting, when I was reading this, I just couldn't get into it, and I'm really trying to make sure that every single book I pick up this year that I finish. So I'm going to continue to read it, but I already know I'm not really a big fan of it. But if you like historical fiction, I think you will like it. I think part of the issue is that I'm either really into short stories lately or nonfiction investigative pieces. So I don't think it's necessarily a knock on the book. It's just not really my cup of tea right now. But I did appreciate the conversation that they're having. I love reading about history. I don't know. I couldn't get into it. But you might like it. It wasn't my thing. All right, so let me see. So that's about 6 books that I read for the month of March, and I should be having up my April review pretty soon in the next couple of weeks. And if you like this review, like, subscribe, write me a comment. Let me know what you think about the books that I wasn't a big fan of, which was The Rebel Nun and Wolf Doctors. If you feel differently about it and maybe you could provide a different perspective, I'd really enjoy that. I'm also going to try and link, if I could find any good reviews, like any positive reviews about anything that I wasn't really a fan of, I'll link it down below, just so you have like an opposing view to kind of look over. I don't know, maybe you'll like it. All right, I'll talk to you later.